Okay, so now we're really going to talk about how the confidence level and sample size affect the margin of error. I think you kind of saw the confidence level in the first activity. So now you're going to do the second activity right here. Okay, so you're going to do that now. And again, we're going to focus on, the margin of error. Oh, yes, the margin of error. Okay, so go do that activity and then come back. All right, so now that you've returned, these 4 notes are so important in terms of margin of error. So first of all, we prefer short confidence intervals with small margin of error. Remember, your point estimate goes in the middle, and it is your margin of error, I'm going to call it the MOE, that controls how wide your interval is. So if your point estimate's here and your MOE is only this big, your margin of error, so now you can see that a larger margin of error makes a bigger interval, and a smaller margin of error makes a smaller interval. Well, we would like short confidence intervals with small margin of errors. We want this situation to occur, okay? Because again, the margin of error is how much we're off by. We don't want to be off by that much, right? If I'm aiming for, a certain size, I want to be relatively that size with a small margin of error so I can be confident what I'm building, right? So what are some ways to reduce the margin of error? Well, to reduce the margin of error, you can change the sample size or the confidence level. And that's what this activity should have showed you what to do. Okay. So let's go down here for sample sizes. Of course, we want larger samples because larger samples are going to narrow our confidence intervals. Larger samples will narrow the intervals. It's going to decrease the margin of error because we're going to have more people we're looking at and have a better idea of what the true value is, right? But the problem with larger samples, as we've said, is it's hard to do. It costs money and time. So it's very hard. But you want large samples. Okay, so that's how the sample size. So the larger the sample, the smaller the margin of error, the more narrow the confidence interval. Now, for confidence level, for the percentage, right? Okay. For confidence percentages, the confidence level, I'm sorry. If you compare an 80% confidence interval to a 90, 95, or 99% confidence interval, 80% confidence interval will be narrow because I'm saying I think I'm only right 80% of the time. So if I'm wrong, who cares? I'm telling you that I'm going to be wrong 20% of the time. So I'm narrower, but I'm not going to capture the value. I'm going to be wrong. I will capture the value less. We'll capture the value less often. I'm going to be wrong more. So you can choose to have a low percentage, which is going to narrow your interval, give you a small interval, but you're going to be wrong more, versus having 90, 95, 9% confidence intervals where your interval will be a little bit wider. So the interval will be wider. And again, that's just because you need to be right 90%, 95%, or 99% of the time. If you tell me a 99% confidence interval, that means you're almost always right. Your interval is going to be pretty wide because you have to capture the value 99% of the time. All right. So think about how these do. So when you lower the confidence level, you decrease the margin of error and you make your interval more narrow. Okay, so be aware of that. Okay, cool. So let's take a look at problems here. Okay, so it says example 2, what's a hashtag? So in the preceding example, you read about a random sample of 2253 US adults who were surveyed for the Pew Internet American Life Project. Based on this survey, the 95% confidence interval for the proportion of all US adults who use Twitter or another service to share updates about themselves or to see updates about others is 0.167 to 0.213. Explain what would happen to the length of the interval if the confidence level were increased to 99%. So what happens if you increased to 99%? Well, first of all, if we look back, increasing the confidence level is going to increase your margin of error. So increasing the confidence level is going to increase the margin of error. Increases the margin of error. Increasing the confidence level increases the margin of error, making your interval, confidence interval, and if you increase the margin of error, that means your confidence interval gets wider, making your confidence interval wider. Now it's going to talk about drawbacks. All right. So in this situation, right, I would say that a drawback to increasing is that your confidence interval does get wider. So that is a drawback, right? You have a wider confidence interval. Remember, we want narrower, wider confidence interval. So be aware of this, the second question of what would the drawback maybe be, and think about what your drawback could be. Okay. Again, we want narrower confidence intervals. Okay. All right. But a good thing is we'd be right more often. Okay. All right. Example B. Explain what would happen to the length of the original interval if the sample size were increased to 5,000. So now we're increasing the sample size to 5,000. So part A was about the confidence level. Part B is about the sample size. So increasing the sample size. Now we want to ask more people because increasing the sample size is going to decreases the margin of error, right? If we ask more people, we think we'll be huddled around the point estimate more, so it's going to decrease the margin of error, making, I said your, making the, making your, making, I'm going to say making the, sorry about that, I don't like your, making the confidence interval more narrow. So when you decrease the margin of error, you shrink your interval, right? So it becomes more narrow. And again, you have to look at what would the drawback be. Well, if you are asking more people, that's going to cost you more time and money. Cost more time and money, right? Because to get all those people surveyed, you got to hire more people, and that's a problem. Okay. All right, great. Okay, so again, hopefully you have that under control. And if not, go back and do that activity again, right? See how the intervals actually change. And again, understand that your point estimate doesn't move. It is the margin of error that truly controls how wide or how narrow your interval is. So make sure you do a good job of getting that under control. All right, last objective's coming.